Okay, well, we're 2 weeks into a 5-week election campaign. Again, it's Mike Shooten, Levi Minderhout with ARPA Canada. We're hoping to do this 5 different times, one for every week of the election campaign. Maybe just a quick recap. Last week when we did this podcast, Levi, we sort of set the stage by talking about what did the last election in 2020 result in and what's all transpired to the point where we are today, where there's seemingly two main political parties vying for British Columbians' votes. Obviously, there's a few other parties as well. We detailed some of that. Obviously, over the course of this past week, individual candidates have been door knocking, trying to get out word as far as where they stand on specific issues, etc.
Yep.
Party leaders been traveling across the province. What are some of the highlights from this past week as far as updates, any policy announcements from the NDP, the BC Conservatives, the Greens, the CHP, etc.? Anything that we want to highlight on this podcast as we get things underway today?
Yeah, there has been a lot that deals with some of the issues that ARPA mostly deals with, but there have been some notable things from the campaign trail. The NDP, they released a couple of things this week. They promised to scrap the carbon tax if the federal government ends up doing that. So that might happen, would likely happen, almost for sure happen if the federal Conservatives won the next election. They also promised that they would force people who have some sort of addiction to access recovery treatment if they needed it. And both of those policies, both on the carbon tax and on that involuntary care, that's actually a change from what they stood for before. Actually, originally at some point many years ago, both the NDP originally was against the carbon tax, and EB originally proposed this involuntary care. But once EB and the NDP got in power, they actually supported the carbon tax, and then didn't want involuntary care, and now they switched back to their original position another time.
So before we move on there, I think everybody understands what they need to about carbon tax and what that means, how it impacts their lives. But this term involuntary care, that's relatively new. You don't hear about it much in Canadian politics or provincial politics. Maybe share with our viewers just a little bit about what does that mean? Like both parties are saying that they're in favor of this. What does that actually mean?
So it basically means, so if there's someone who is out on the street and has a addiction to drugs, and they are in that state of addiction and dependence, right now, most parties and most jurisdictions, they don't force people into recovery programs. And their rationale there is that we need to respect the liberty, freedom, and autonomy of people to make those decisions for themselves.
Okay.
But what more and more political parties and Canadians have come to realize is that in this case, health and wholeness and recovery and freedom from the slavery addiction, it can't always be a voluntary choice. And for people to actually escape that, there needs to be some level of a government or an institution or families stepping in and saying, no, you're in a terrible situation right now, and we know that you can't help yourself, and so we are going to try to provide the care that you need, even though you don't want to voluntarily get it yourself.
Okay. So that's good to know. Both political parties that are in the front running for the government of British Columbia have committed to that. Both parties also have, I think this last week, released something about housing and affordability. What did the NDP promise to do if elected?
Yeah, the NDP, they came up with a version of what the federal government actually came out a couple of years ago. They promised that they would help first-time middle-class home buyers buy their first house. And the way that would work is the government would basically step in when those people bought a house and say, we'll pay 40% of the cost of that new house. And basically that would just lower the mortgage costs for that individual, for that household, and then whenever they sold that house, they would give that money back to the government plus any appreciation in that house value.
Okay.
And then
so it only applied then to first-time home buyers who bought a new house.
First-time home buyers, yes, and I'm pretty sure it's a new house. It was for the federal policy. I forget it precisely if it was for the provincial policy or not.
So it's a fairly narrow group of buyers there.
Yeah.
Okay. What did the Conservatives say, if we stick with that one? What did the Conservatives say when it comes to affordability and housing?
Yeah, well, their main plank that they just came out with this week is something that's classic Conservative policy, a tax credit. And they basically said that every single month, if they were elected, after a couple of years of being in power, they would allow people to deduct up to $3,000 in mortgage payments or rent payments from their taxable income. So basically, if you're a renter or a homeowner that still has a mortgage, you could pay less income tax for that.
Okay. Wow. Do you have any idea what that would amount to for like the average family?
I think they said if you claim the full amount, it'd be something like $1,500 to $1,600 per year. It could save once fully implemented, but they would take a couple of years to actually get all the way there.
Okay. Okay. So it'd be like a phased in type of.
Yeah, right now the BC Conservatives were like, there's the BC budget is in a terrible place right now. We have one of the largest deficits in BC's history. So they're like, we can't do this all right now. We need to slowly put our fiscal house in order in other places before we can really get to the scale that they want. But that is a promise that they are making.
Okay. And then the BC Conservatives also seem to realize, like we all do, that the demographics are shifting in our province as well as in our country. What did they announce specifically to try to address that? There was a policy targeting seniors.
Yeah, they actually released a bunch of policies that they would do for seniors, all sorts of different things like increasing caregiver benefits for people who spend their time taking care of elderly family members, actually any family members that have needs for care. But then one of the other big promises was to make 5,000 more long-term care beds available. There's a whole bunch of other smaller policies in the whole suite of policies, but those are a couple of the big ones of note.
Okay. So in addition to the two main parties, the BC Greens are also committed to running a candidate in every riding in the province. Did they come out with anything this week of significance insofar as policy or platform?
Yeah, they came up with a couple and kind of still following the same vein as those other two political parties, the NDP and the Conservatives. This week, the Greens came out with a promise to continue the carbon tax no matter what happens in other jurisdictions, though they would increase the rebates that British Columbians get back from the program. Yeah. So still having the carbon tax, but make it less expensive for the average person in British Columbia. And they promised to continue to fund and even to expand what they call safer supply of drugs. Okay. That was two big things that they came out with, and they released those. My guess is probably because the other political parties are changing their policies on that, and so they want to present themselves as kind of the true progressive option, if you will, for voters in British Columbia.
Okay, so it's clearly a stark contrast to the two initiatives we just talked about from the other parties. Okay, and then lastly, the BCCHP this week. They made it known that they're planning to run two candidates in this upcoming provincial election.
Yeah.
Anything significant from the BCCHP as far as that goes?
They've mostly released their policy that you can go out and see on the BCCHP website, but they did release an article today, and in that article they said, and they admitted and praised actually the BC Conservatives for some of the policy changes that they've been promoting. On SOGI, for example, has been a big one, and medical transitioning. But in there, they really question about what is the extent of change that would ever happen under a Conservative government, and really highlighting how the Christian Heritage Party is the only pro-life political party in BC that would prevent abortion or defund euthanasia and really protect conscience rights in the province. So they made a criticism of the BC Conservatives, and I think a legitimate one, that they are only committed to change, only so much change, and only on certain issues. And so they use that as a clarion call for supporters to come and vote for them in this coming election. But yeah, as you mentioned right now they're only running two candidates. And so only people in a couple ridings in northern BC are going to actually have the opportunity to vote for the Christian Heritage Party. Okay.
Good. All right. So as far as we know the election date is October 19th.
Yep.
Prior to that, there's going to be advanced polling. Where can people go to find out what those dates are and where they can vote? That's something people ask us, even fellow staff members are like, well, where do I go to vote? As we know, and we talked about last time, the ridings have been redistributed, so the boundaries are different. People are in different ridings. What's the one place where you would say people should go to?
So if you want to know anything about how to get involved in how to vote in this election, go to the Election BC website. There you can find out basically everything that you need to know. You can find out there's a helpful tool there that tells you what riding you're in, because like you said, all the ridings in BC changed. We actually added 5 6 more ridings because the province's population grew. So you might be in a riding with a different name. You might have different candidates running than you might be accustomed to. So make sure that you go online and make sure you know which riding you're in so that you're not surprised when you go to the voting booth to cast a ballot. And then also on that website, you can find the different ways to vote. You can learn about how you can, of course, vote on voting day on October 19th, but you also find out that there's opportunities for advanced voting. It'll give you a list of all the different voting centers available for advanced voting. That's around kind of a whole week around Thanksgiving. And then there's also the opportunity to vote by mail if you email or write to Elections BC. They'll send you a ballot through the mail, and you just have to make sure that it goes back to them by voting day on the 19th.
Okay.
And then finally, you can go to that website, the BC Elections website, and you can get a list of all the candidates that are going to be running in your riding. And that list of candidates is going to be finalized. We're recording this on Thursday, September 26th. It's going to be finalized on Saturday, so probably the day you're listening to this, Saturday 28th. By 1 p.m., all the candidates need to be registered with Elections BC, and you'll know precisely who's running in your riding.
Okay, good. That's really good to know that date and the other dates. So yeah, if October 19th is a day that doesn't work for you to vote, be sure to check out where you have to go for advanced polling, because you got the whole week prior to show up at these polling stations and cast your ballot. Okay, Levi, we've talked a little bit about the main parties, a couple of the what we would sometimes call fringe parties. The smaller parties. This election also has quite a few independents running. So let's talk just briefly about the role of independents, the impact they can make, the impact they might have made in the past. You've done some research for us. Just what does this look like over the past 100 or so years? Yeah. Why are we seeing more independents this time? Maybe let's start with that. Like, why are we seeing more of them?
Yeah, it'll be fascinating, this election. And the main reason why we're going to see a lot more independents running this election compared to other ones is simply because that BC United Party folded and said it was not going to be running candidates this election. And some of those candidates are running for the Conservatives. Some bowed out. Some of them have even endorsed their NDP, former opponents. But some of them are still angry enough or believe that there isn't a centrist option for voters and are going to run as independents in their riding.
Okay. So what are some of the key names that we might see there? Like key figures from the BC United who are deciding now, have decided already as independents.
Yeah, there's 5 BC United MLAs who are like current MLAs, incumbents, who are going to be running in their local ridings. And that is Tom Shapitka, he is running in the Kootenay Rockies. Dan Davies, he won in Peace River North. Coralie Oakes is in Prince George, North Caribou. Corinne Kirkpatrick is in West Vancouver, Capilano. And Mike Bernier, he ran and won in Peace River South.
Yeah, and I think what's key here is, and you did the research, is that these BC United MLAs are incumbents now. They all won by 20% or more in their respective ridings.
Yeah.
So they have name recognition. They have a lot of respect with the voters in those ridings. So it'll be interesting to see how many people gravitate to them and just disregard the main parties altogether.
Yeah, they really think that they have a shot about potentially winning that riding as an independent, but that's something that's incredibly hard to do. So like in the last 75 years here in British Columbia, there's only been a single person who's won as an independent.
Oh, wow.
And that was, her name was, let me find it here.
It was in Delta, right?
Yeah, it was in Delta South. It was a gal named Vicky Huntington.
Okay.
She won that Delta South seat as an independent in 2009 and 2013. But aside from that, there's been no independents elected in the last 75 years. So it's really difficult to happen. Yeah. But if there is an opportunity for that actually to work, basically now would be the time where there's people who have been an MLA for a very long time, are well known in their riding, and might be a more middle-of-the-road candidate that some voters might be interested in voting for than, say, the BC Conservatives or the BC NDP.
Yeah. And I think the reason why we're watching this, and it's going to be really important to see what factor they play, is because, as we said last week, it was a statistical tie. The polls were showing the NDP was 1 or 2 percentage points above. This week, it's again a statistical tie with the Conservatives 1 or 2 percentage points above.
Yep.
So if 1 or 2 independents are elected, they could hold what's often called then the balance of power in the BC legislature.
Yep.
Because either party is going to need those independents support to do anything.
Yeah, like imagine, for example, so there are 93 ridings in British Columbia. So that means you need 47 to win the election. That's exactly half plus plus one.
Yeah.
So imagine a scenario where you need 47 ridings to win, and like the Conservatives win 45 seats, so two shorts of a majority. The NDP win 44, so also short of majority. The Greens win one, and Independents win three. Well, in like that type of situation, there's going to be a minority parliament, minority legislature, and either the BC Conservatives or the BC NDP would need the support of the Independents in order to actually govern the province.
Yeah.
So these independents are really kind of doing a long shot to say, like, we could hold a ton of power if we could somehow find a way to win as an independence and hold the balance of power in a very, very close election and a very close legislature.
Yeah, that's fascinating because it like so many scenarios could evolve from that, right?
Yeah.
Three independents could coalesce and say, well, let's go work with the NDP, and the NDP all of a sudden has a majority.
Yep.
They can govern, or let's work with the Conservatives, or they could say, we'll work with either of you depending on what you're doing and whether or not we support it. So
yeah.
Again, that speaks to the importance of being involved, right? Like how every vote matters. We talked last time about, between 55 and 62% of people vote in provincial elections, eligible voters. That means there's a whole lot of people out there who could help make a difference in an election like that. So let's jump into that. We did comment that last time, our very first podcast, we went maybe a bit longer than we thought. So we're going to try to keep it a little bit shorter for you this time.
Yeah.
Getting involved in the campaign, numerous ways to do so. Obviously, you can volunteer for candidates. Candidates need that type of support. You can even work for Elections BC.
Yeah.
I know my mother-in-law has done that in the past, work at a polling station and had really a great day. Like they do a really good job of taking care of those people.
I did it as a high school student, like grade 11 or something like that.
Really?
Yeah, I worked for a polling station before I could vote.
Okay.
I was working the polling station. I had I think it was my social studies, like 10 or 11 textbook. So then when it was quiet, I was studying for my next test or for exam. But yeah, I even did it before I got involved in politics at ARPA or at any other level. So
okay, very good. And then obviously during an election, everybody's seeing the signs go up. We're going to see ads, hear ads on the radio and so on. They need funds to run. So if you're so inclined, certainly if there's good candidates in your riding and you want to support them, you can do so financially. There's even really good benefits to that. You get huge tax rebates when you give certain amounts. There is a threshold. I think you can't just keep giving. There's a cap.
Yeah, I think it's like $1,600 or something like that. You can't give more than that.
Provincial election? Okay. Yeah, so anyway, those are a number of ways. Work for Elections BC, donate, volunteer for a candidate. Also want to touch a bit on how you can have an impact in this election when it comes to issues. Right. So last time we touched on just very briefly the aspect of gender dysphoria, transitioning for minors, a little bit on SOGI 123. Levi, this week you had an article published in the Hub talking about medical transition, especially when it regards minors and what some of the countries in other jurisdictions, especially in Europe, are doing when it comes to that. Obviously, a major report came out this year, the CAST report, talking about that. So maybe for our viewers here in BC, maybe just let's talk for a couple minutes about why is this a provincial issue? Why does it matter at a provincial level? And how people can kind of inject that narrative or those concerns into this provincial election campaign. What would we be looking for from a provincial government?
Yeah, well, on those issues, like when it comes to SOGI 123 in schools or medical transitioning for minors, those are issues of health and of education, and those fall squarely in the jurisdiction of provinces. So if we want any action or change in those policies, it has to happen at the provincial level. And so it's these MLAs that we're going to be electing in a little less than a month. These are the MLAs that are going to make decisions on the topics like SOGI and medical transitioning. And so that's why it's really important for all of us to do a little bit of homework, to know where the parties stand on these issues, like we mentioned already before. But we have an election guide that's available on ARPA's website that tell you exactly where the parties stand on different issues. So see where the parties stand on them. But you also really need to know and get to know your local elected candidates or your local candidates that are ready to be elected. Because a party might stand on one side of an issue, but there can be diversity within the political parties about where they stand on medical transitioning, on euthanasia, on independent schooling, all these different things. And so it's actually really important for you not just to know where a party stands, where a leader stands, but also for you to talk to your local your local representatives or the people who are running to represent you and ask where they stand on the issues, because they might have a stance that's slightly different than their party, or maybe they don't. Maybe they agree with that party stance, but it's not a top issue for them. So they're not going to ever talk about it. They're never going to raise it in the legislature. They might vote for it if the time comes, but they wouldn't make it a priority. And so I think one really great way for all of you to like ask questions or go learn and talk to and interact with your candidates is local all candidates debates.
Mm-hmm.
So we sent out
super important.
We sent out a newsletter last Saturday when the writ dropped, detailing where there was going to be some all candidates debates in the Fraser Valley. I think there might be some more in your local areas. I'm not entirely sure, but go look and see if there are.
Yeah.
But a couple of the ones in the Fraser Valley, I heard some disappointing news on that for at least for the candidate debates in Abbotsford and Langley, 6 out of the 7 Conservative candidates aren't going to be showing up. So.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So, like, the NDP, the Green candidates might be there, and some in their independents or other candidates, but the Conservative candidates won't show up.
Why would that be?
Well, they actually put out a statement that's to come from some of the local papers, and they say, I'll just quote it from here. We owe it to the people of Langley or Abbotsford to speak with them about their concerns on the direction of our province and how we can make it better. In the lead up to the October 19th election, our focus is on engaging with voters directly at the doors. So, like a very grassroots message, but at the end of the day, I honestly think this is a bad day kind of for democracy. It makes it harder for people to actually interact with all the candidates at the same time and hear them debate each other on the issues and really get to see them in action. Like, if you're elected as an MLA, you spend a lot of time in the House of Commons, sorry, not the House of Commons, in the BC legislature debating.
Yeah. And
so if that's a crucial part of your job, I would love to see candidates of every party practice that, showcase that for people to make an informed decision on in all candidates debates. Yeah. So it's disappointing when candidates say, no, we're not going to make use of this opportunity.
Yeah, that's too bad. It was, we can talk more about it later, but we were talking earlier today how it's about 15 years ago that I ran in an election, and I loved the all candidates debates.
You'd be good in debate. You'd be good in debate.
But in their, not necessarily defense, but I can understand how in today's day and age, their ability to connect with people at the doors is pretty important. While an all candidates debate is an opportunity for people to come there, it's also where the media are going to show up. And then whatever is said there will be broadcast to the world through the lens of the media, which might be part of the reason why they're like, no, let's just stay away from those and communicate directly as we can.
Yeah.
Anyway, we gotta wrap this up soon here. There's going to be lots more to talk about, obviously, as the platforms are released and more policies come forward. We also have a leaders debate coming up on October 8th, and we'll touch on that next week as well. But we do want to conclude again by just reminding everybody about the importance of getting involved during this campaign.
Yeah.
We talked about how close it is. You got to get involved by volunteering, following the issues, connecting, whether it's through your social media platforms, whether it's directly through email or phone with your candidates. Find out what they're about. Encourage them to take positions and talk about the issues that we hold dear, like the one we talked about today when it comes to medical transitioning. This election is important. We could see change here in our province. People who are obviously in favor of the status quo in the current government, they're going to want to get out there and get every vote that counts. And people who want to see change are going to want to get out there and make sure that every vote counts.
Yeah, like I can't emphasize enough. Like if you care about politics, or you actually even care about like living the life in a way that's pleasing to God and with your own freedom, to get involved in this election, like it's going to be an incredibly close election, and every vote, every volunteer hour, and every dollar that's donated is going to make a difference. So like I can't stress highly enough, go out and vote. Encourage everyone in your family to go out and fill out a ballot. And then if you have a little bit of extra time, go and volunteer a little bit. Go chip in a couple dollars. Like the first $100 you donate, you'll get 75% of that back when you file your taxes. So that's basically you're giving $25 to a party, you get $75 back later. So just go and do whatever you can to be involved in this election, because if we really want to change our province, then that requires us to all get off our seats, not just stop watching maybe hockey season. I know we're going to be watching hockey when it starts coming up soon, but the
Canucks won their first preseason game.
They did in overtime. I saw a couple of highlights that looked good. But at the end of the day, hockey doesn't change the world as much as we love that.
You're right.
Politics is a little bit more impactful, so get involved.
It definitely does. Okay, good. Second one, thanks, Levi. Really appreciate your input. I
Yep.
know that we heard some feedback after the first one. If anybody wants to engage with this or has suggestions for things that we should cover, just email my colleague Levi,
Yep.
levi@arpcanada.ca. Look forward to hearing from you. If not, we'll connect with you again next week.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for listening, everyone.